in defense of hookers and coke, aka why PIMPs and drug dealers are the real underappreciated heroes of our age. This will be the topic of today's conversation. I believe, running a longevity channel, I have a certain responsibility towards my listeners to educate them of these topics. That's why I invited today the Austrian economist Max Hillebrand.
Happy to be on here. I've really been enjoying your journey down longevity for the last couple months, and happy to be part of it.
You know what? Let's talk about us a little bit. So, so before we get into any of the economics and ethics and whatnot, I thought I would ask you to share your story with my listeners. So I'm asking this not only because of how inspiring it might be, but it will also serve as some lore building for this channel, right? So the question to you is how you came to my company to write documentation and became the CEO of it.
I guess it started mainly with actually me being an economist, right? That was my first love, my first rabbit hole that I went down deep. The Austrian school, monetary economics, libertarian principles. That was really compelling for me, and that's when I first time encountered Bitcoin. And I didn't get it because I didn't understand what free software is and what cyberspace is all about. So years later, a friend of mine introduces me to Ubuntu and Linux. It helps me install a new free and open source operating system. And that's when I first really started to think about cyberspace and was looking for ways to reconcile it with the Austrian principles. I found this book, Against Intellectual Property by Stefan Kinsella, which is amazing. Really explains deeply why software and speech and ideas are fundamentally different than all the other goods that we have on the market, and why they cannot be owned and should not be owned, right? So this really made me instantly a staunch free software enthusiast and supporter. And then when I heard about Bitcoin the second time around, it all made sense because it's not just a money system that is backed by really strong economical principles, Austrian economical principles. It also is free and open source and a peer-to-peer network, and that combination sealed the deal for me instantly. So I was curious on how can I help the ecosystem grow, and at first, I think as anyone should do, it was to apply my expertise pre-Bitcoin in the Bitcoin realm. So I started to do a lot of videos about economics and explaining these different aspects of it. But simultaneously, I wanted to challenge myself with new things, and that was to learn more about the software itself. Right. So I made tutorials on how to use cool software tools that I was a big fan of, and yeah, that included a lot of different amazing projects like BISC, the decentralized exchange, or cold cards, right, or hardware wallets to keep your Bitcoin private key safe. BTC Pay Server was on that list early on as well. And I was also a staunch fan of the Block Digest podcast, may it rest in peace, which was excellent, specifically during the era of the block size wars, right, with user activated soft fork and No2x. Um, I remember listening to these shows that you guys did because Nopara was a co-host, really learning so much about Bitcoin. One day you were talking about this new cool project that you're working on, a wallet for Bitcoin that focuses on privacy and making anonymous transactions. At that point, I was an aspiring cypherpunk, so to say, and I understood the value that privacy means to humankind. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. Let me see how I can help. So I downloaded the first versions of Hidden Wallet. It didn't work, so I abandoned that rather quickly. But then Wasabi Wallet for 1.0 came out, and I was like, yeah, cool. Let's talk about it. Invited you on to my podcast interview series to tell people who's that weirdo working on it, right? Who's the man behind the code? And yeah, we did that a couple times, and was explaining people on how does Wasabi work, why is it cool, what are block filters, what is Tor, what are coin joins, right? Yeah, but eventually I realized, hey, there's no written documentation there, and a lot of people kept asking the same questions on Telegram channels and so on. And I was getting too lazy to repeat myself. So I thought, why not write a website, a documentation where I can always put the explanations that I'm writing to an asking user. And then when next time someone comes along, I can just send the link. So this was then when I got some help from other actual developers and coders to build up the knowledge database, and we shipped that and kept working on it. And it's a really thorough documentation by now, still well maintained, that explains not just why Wasabi is important, but also how it works, right? And how to build it, how to make it better. Yeah, and then that was the fun journey that then I guess didn't stop.
Well, yeah, and you kind of become the CEO from there also.
Yeah, I joined the dev calls, right? And didn't leave. Asked a lot of stupid questions. Was the professional rubber duck, so to say, and just learned more about it, and did more and more marketing. Went to a lot of different conferences and other podcasts, and talked about the project, right? And in doing so, I got to know the team better and better, right? Made really great friendships, and yeah, we started a research club, right? On hey, how can we take Wasabi to the next level? Where we invited a bunch of people to join us, reason through their academic papers, and finally design a Wabi Sabi, the second generation of Wasabi, and probably the third generation of coin joins. So that was a great success. I guess you started the company um, with two other people, right? You started it as the technical guy, the developer, but you didn't want to worry about the other stuff. So you got two economists and lawyers involved, right, to help you on the business side of things, so to say, and the legal side of things. They were, however, not really deep into Bitcoin at first. I think you introduced them to the topic, and eventually they wanted to enjoy more time with family and not worry so much about the actual operating of the company. And by then I was doing all the other stuff for Wasabi, right? Because one of my great learnings was that even as a non-coder, as not a developer, there are so many things that you can contribute to a software project, because a lot of other stuff needs to be done ultimately. And so, yeah, this I just was there to, I guess, pick up where other people wanted to leave it, and was familiar with the code, or like with the architecture rather, I should say, and very familiar with all the people working on it. Was already bringing a couple new people to join the project, so was familiar with hiring, and yeah, just contributed wherever I could.
All right. So, how did I get to longevity from here? That's a story for another time. You mentioned intellectual property rights there, and maybe that would be a good place to start our economic investigations, because in the longevity space, intellectual property rights are king. There are very few people I could even call our allies in this field, our philosophical allies here. I'm just thinking about, should I even make a case for intellectual property rights, or just take that as a default that everyone believes that intellectual property rights are an important concept for society, and right of the authors of how other people are using their work is something that comes without even questions. So yeah, I think that's the normal view on it. Everyone believes that intellectual property rights are a good thing, but it's not you, is it?
Why shouldn't we, make some money on our ideas, basically? That incentivizes people to come up with more new ideas. And we need to have a business model for the researchers and designers of new things, ultimately. I guess that's quite a common phrasing, right? But I guess we should step back a bit and see what are property rights for? What's the problem that's being solved here? And the problem in if we're, let's say, traditional property rights, right? Like ownership of physical resources, is that when we have a physical scarce resource, like a steak, then only one person at one time can eat the steak. One steak cannot be eaten by 100 people at the same time in different places, right? There is now a rivalrousness over who can consume this good and use it to not be hungry anymore. And the same goes for production goods, right? If we have a lump of metal, then we can either build a railroad or an engine or rebar for concrete steel, right? And we can only use this ore for one of these production stages at a time. So the real question is who gets to decide where we allocate these scarce resources? And that's a conflict. We would all like to eat, right, and to build stuff. But unfortunately, there's not enough goods to satisfy all of the desires that everyone has. And how do we solve this conflict? There's a couple options, like nobody owns it, nobody gets to decide, but then we starve, right? So that's not really a good solution. We could say everyone owns it, so we need to get permission of everyone on this planet, and we need to all agree on who gets to eat the steak. That's terribly impractical. We could say that this group over there, they get to decide. And maybe we vote for all these people. But that very quickly turns into like this master and slave conundrum of what if these people don't give anything to us, right? Then we all starve as well. So the final approach, and I would say a good solution to it, is that whoever created it owns it, and he gets to decide what to do with it, right? So the farmer who raises the cow, who takes care of it, he gets to decide. Does he give it? Does he sell it to someone else? Does he keep it? Does he bring it to a butcher? And then if the butcher acquires the cow and slaughters it, now he owns it, and he can choose whom should he forward the butchered steak to, right? And whoever acquires the steak by contract, which could be a gift, right? Maybe the butcher wants to feed in a poor family and just gratuitously gives the steak without any exchange. Or, of course, it could be for cash, right? The butcher gets paid and he gives the steak to whoever gives him the most money. And so this actually addresses the conflict. Now we know how to allocate any resource. It's simply up to the owner of the resource. So that's the free market, right? When we have private ownership in goods and services, and contractual rights that define how this ownership transfers from one person to the other. Always with consent of both parties. If there's a butcher who has the steak and there's the construction worker who has a bunch of steel, they can trade, right? The construction worker gets the steak, feeds his family. The butcher gets the steel or the house building services of the construction guy to build his second butcher shop. Both are happy, right? They got what the other had, but they desired more than the other person. And we have a win-win situation, right? That's the beautiful thing of the free market. We all get to benefit from specializing on what we're best at and then trading with others. And that's only possible if we have a private ownership of goods, scarce goods, right? So then let's get to ideas. What are ideas actually? Because they are goods, right? They are useful. A good is something that we need in order to produce other things or to solve our problems. Right? So ideas are incredibly important. Imagine you're on an island and you have all the raw materials there, right? All the tools, etc., that you would need to do something with it, but you don't know how to swing a hammer, right? You don't know how to weld steel, right? You're lacking the ideas of how to transform these resources into what you actually want. So ideas are goods. They're not bad, right? They're good. They help us to produce things, and they're essential in the production. But there is a crazy difference, right? That they are non-exclusive. They're not rivalrous, right? If one guy knows how to swing a hammer or how to start a fire, then he can tell the second person of, hey, this is exactly what you need to do in order to start the fire. And now both people have this knowledge. Right? We've duplicated, we've copied our ideas. And the first guy didn't have to give up his knowledge, his understanding of a subject when he was telling the other person how to do it. And that's magical, right? Now all of a sudden we can copy our know-how, and anyone can benefit from it. Anyone who wants to know, who needs to know, can partake of and take a sip of this fountain of knowledge without diminishing the like ownership or the access to this information for someone else. Right? So ideas are fundamentally non-scarce, which means we don't need to decide how to allocate them. Simply anyone who can want them can have them, and there's no additional cost or downside or sacrifice that someone has to do if he passes that knowledge on. And that means that the problem that property rights address, right, the thing that we try to solve in physical reality, with physical resources, is precisely to mitigate the downsides of scarcity. But in the realm of ideas, because they are non-scarce, we don't actually have to worry about this at all, right? It's not a problem that needs to be addressed. So trying to put the concept of ownership onto the realms of ideas is absolutely counterproductive. And it's not just counterproductive, and it doesn't actually protect the knowledge or the ownership in the knowledge of one person. On the other hand, it violates the ownership in the scarce resources of someone else. Right? So let's say that Nopara comes up with an idea of how to start a fire, right? Let's stick with that example. He knows it. He is the first one to come up with it. He uses it on his own wood, right, that he has physical ownership of, and starts a fire. Right? Let's say I see him, right? And now I realized, okay, I just got to create some friction, right, with a bow on some wood, and with that we can start a fire. Cool. So I've acquired this non-scarce information of the blueprint, the step-by-step guide on how to do it. And I turn around, I go into the forest, I cut down a tree, therefore acquiring ownership in the wood, right? I've done the work, I've created the cut pieces of wood, I own them. And now I start to apply his idea on how to start the fire. He comes over and says, wait a second, that's my idea. You're now stealing my thoughts on how to start a fire. You're not allowed to do that. Right? I don't give you the right to utilize the ideas that I created, that I have ownership in, which means I freeze to death. And the thing is, he now actually takes away my ownership with the fire and my own physical body, because I own my body and I own the wood that I just cut. These are scarce resources that I should have the power to decide how to allocate them. And if I want to allocate these resources in order to build a fire, then if he tries to stop me because of his perceived ownership over the ideas, he actually claims ownership over my body and the wood that is rightfully ours. So the idea of intellectual property rights always comes at the expense of violating property rights in actually scarce resources that are owned by someone else. So any form of intellectual property right, therefore, is theft, right? And comes with way more problems and downsides than that we would actually try to solve in the first place.
That's a cool story, bro. But imagine a big pharmaceutical company who is trying to develop a longevity drug, and they are putting a lot of resources into it. They are doing all kinds of phase 1, phase 2, phase 45 trials, right? Takes many, many years. And so now you're telling me that if they have succeeded to create that longevity drug that they created, they should not have the right to have the
Yeah,
patent
basically.
for it.
And that's not because they didn't put a lot of work and effort into it. It's just that they don't own the factory of the other guys, right? The other people have built this factory to produce a good. So they should be able to use their factory as they see fit. The thing is, though, to produce a product is way more than just to do the research. Right? Doing the research is an integral and important part of it, but it's not everything, right? You need to have the production facility, you need to have the logistics and delivery, you need to have the marketing, brand building, marketing it directly to consumers or to other businesses. So there's a lot of extra steps that need to be taken in order to be useful. Just doing research alone is not really useful. And there is a plethora of ways to make a money out of research that does not involve claiming ownership of someone else's factory. You can sell, for example, access to the details of this research, right? You can sell your expertise and labor to ensure that other people understand these tools as well. Just because there is no ownership in ideas doesn't mean that you can be selective with what you tell other people. The creation of these pharmaceutical drugs are extremely complex and quite difficult to reverse engineer. So if you want to keep them a secret, that's fine. Just don't tell anyone about it. Right? You can guard access to knowledge and simply not share. Right? That's what privacy is all about. The ability to selectively reveal yourself to the world. So being able to just not tell anyone how exactly you did that, that's fine. It's just that when someone else finds it out with his own research, for example, just because he came to the same conclusion as you did, that this particular combination of atoms or proteins or whatever makes a useful drug, that doesn't mean that you can stop him from producing them. Right? So the ability to just the ideas themselves are not the only thing that is useful here. And if someone takes the result of your ideas and actually brings them to market, that is an equally valuable thing that has to be done, right? So it's easy to be a failed entrepreneur, so to say, to focus too much on research and not enough on marketing or business development, which just leads to an outcome that people don't want, right? And people want the things that they actually know about and that they know solves a problem for them. So yeah, we need the ability to actually ensure that people have the knowledge to make useful products. And that's how everyone benefits.
But can you at least keep some secrets, or you have to share the recipe for the drug for everyone?
Ultimately, you own your body, right? And so you can choose not to speak about a certain subject. So you do have the right to do that. The question is it a wise strategy? Because actually being open with your innovations and your advancements comes with an incredible amount of benefit. Other people are now interested in what you're doing. And they might build on top of what you've come up with. And the cool thing with I guess free software or free ideas in general is that it goes both ways. It's not just that you publish your findings, it's that other people publish their findings as well, and you can use that. And so a lot of the scientific advancements actually comes from people publishing papers and ideas, right? So that other people build on top of it. So there's an incredible amount of benefit of other people solving your problems without you even necessarily having to pay for them. Right? It's almost a cheat code to be able to get the insight of an incredibly large amount of people to be channeled to your own problems. I guess one useful example here is what we currently have with large language models. OpenAI and Google decided to keep their research and development closed source. Nobody knows exactly what's going on in these models. Only the researchers hired by the company can progress and solve the problems. Right? On the other hand, we have Facebook or Meta who open sourced a lot of their stack, right? A lot of their research, their development, the code, the models of the weight, which now means that they have a small army of dedicated people who do research and development on top of their architecture simply because they can, and they won't be put in jail just for trying to solve the problems of this technology. And Facebook has gained 1 million or more developers working on a technology that is extremely useful to Facebook as a company because they build their stack around the things that they've made public. And so this just means you get a lot of benefit of leveraging the fact that you cannot own ideas. In fact, that ownership of ideas is extremely counterproductive. And if you embrace that, it's like embracing gravity and aerodynamic pressures, etc., to fly. Right? You cannot fly if you fight against gravity. You have to work with it. And since ideas, just like gravity, are fundamental, leverage the concept that you don't need to own ideas in order to be useful.
Another example is the Longevity World Cup, which I'm working on. It's free and open source software. And it's funny. First of all, most people in the longevity space have no idea what this is, of course. But when someone realizes that, oh wow, wait, what? You're sharing everything. Like, what the heck is going on? Why would you do that? They just cannot fathom that. Let's move on to another thing that is under my skin in the longevity space, which is I see very often people are making an argument towards government institutions or government policy topics online in longevity that, well, look, if the government would just put a lot of money and resources into working on longevity, then we could save a lot of money because the sick care and the healthcare system wouldn't need that much anymore. So, should the government put a lot of money to longevity?
Again, we have the problem of how and where do we allocate our resources because we have a limited amount of them. And the thing is, we could allocate them in something foolish. We could dig a hole and the next day shovel it closed again and do that 1 million times over. We'd all have jobs, right? We'd all be fully allocated, but at the end of the day, we have nothing to show for it. That's torture, actually. So we need to be wise about how to allocate our resources. And what seems to me to be the best way to allocate our resources is to have a plethora of different approaches where the entrepreneur who is actually allocating the resources has ultimate decision-making power on how to do it. because this means we don't just focus on one specific thing and everyone has to do exactly that. Because if this approach turns out to be wrong, if it's not useful, then we've wasted everyone else's time. Right? So yes, stealing a lot of money from people and applying it to what a dictator thinks is great can lead to really good outcomes if we're 100% sure that this is exactly what needs to be done. The problem is we don't really know what needs to be done. And this means that we should have the freedom that people can experiment and pursue the path that they think is the most fruitful straight path to victory, right? And by having an open market where anyone can allocate his resources as they see fit, then we will are likely to have a good outcome, because anyone might have the chance of hitting the jackpot, so to say, of finding the right solution, and anyone is incentivized to do that properly. Because if you're allocating your own resources on your own problems, you're very diligent in what you do. You're not foolishly spending money on ways that are likely not to be fruitful. But if you're spending or allocating someone else's money on someone else's problem, you don't really care. It's not your money, and you don't care if the problem gets solved anyway. Right? So instead of having that centralization of a government collecting taxes from anyone, right? So spending someone else's money, and then some bureaucrat deciding on where exactly to allocate it, the most likely result is that it's not going to be in the areas that you guys want it to be seen. Right? That's why, I don't know, a lot of money gets spent on NASA, right, on getting people to the moon, but nobody really, or no government official really spends the money on longevity per se. Right? This shows you that there is a problem with governments allocating resources. They don't allocate them where you think it would be best, but they still take 50% of your paycheck. Right? So imagine a world where you don't get stolen from via the taxation in the first place, right? Meaning you have more capital at your disposal, and there would be no roadblocks in research and development, where you could simply start a company and do research, do trials, including on humans, right? Of course, consentingly, to really pursue the areas that you think are most lucrative in the long run, would actually end up solving the problem. This would simply mean that you have the ability to solve the problem yourself, right? How you phrased the question was kind of complaining that the government doesn't allocate the resources directly or correctly, and saying that, hey, we should change the government to allocate the resources better. My solution would be, no, like, you are the one who should decide how to allocate the resources that you can raise for a certain cause. Right? That might be your own money, that might be money from donors or investors. But ultimately, anyone should have the ability to apply his capital in a way that it solves the problems that he's seeking out to solve. And that is what the free market is ultimately about. And it would be way more efficient in solving the problems that a group of people would like to have solved. Now, this could also actually mean that we're investing less money in it than we otherwise would have. Like, arguably, going to the moon in like the 1970s or whenever that happened was too early. We spent a gazillion dollars or capital on building the Saturn V rocket, right, which just died or was thrown away after a one-time use. That was incredibly inefficient. Now, sure, we get some positive results out of this, but nevertheless, we could have done a lot of other things with that money. Maybe we should have worked on longevity before trying to fly to space. Maybe that would have been better, because then we, for example, prolong the health span of anyone, meaning we have more researchers solving harder problems for a longer time. So first addressing longevity and then addressing spaceflight might have been the better choice. And if the people in the 70s and 80s would have been wealthier and freer, maybe they could have made that choice instead. So we would have not allocated so much money on spaceflight and instead allocated more money on longevity. But because all of the people who would want to spend their money on longevity were stolen via taxes and hindered with bureaucratic red tape, it was not possible for them to allocate the money or resources to the problems that they would actually have liked to solve. So ultimately, the free market is extremely good at allocating resources to what really needs to be done. If we define what really needs to be done is what people are actually willing to pay for.
So first thing, quality control. Look, there are stuff in products that are not good for us, but it takes a very, very long time or something bad to actually happen. Let's think about something like sugar or something like the trans fatty acids, which were banned in the European Union, right? Here is a problem. But first, what's your position on how should governments control the quality of certain, let's say, supplements?
Well, I think first of all, companies should, right? Like if there is a provable way that someone can say that a certain product by a company caused bodily harm, right? And that is a verifiable claim, then the company owes him damages, right? Liability. So that is, I guess, the baseline of companies have a huge incentive to not get sued. That is step one, right? So companies will do their own research, but then there's also kind of peer review, right? Not only companies, but also other, consumer protection agencies or something like this, kind of review societies, right? People who make it their mission to review the product of companies also have a good incentive to do this, right? They would get fame and fortune if they find out that some product is not as advertised. However, I think there should be room for experimentation, right? If a company wants to make tests on an unproven substance and there are consenting adults who know that it is unproven and who know that there are potential risks with it, then I think there should be room for allowing these experiments to happen. And so having a blanket statement that you can only sell products after they have been successfully proven simply means that nothing ever gets successfully proven, because how could you bring it to market if not with some initial trial run, right?
Okay, so in that system, there is no government.
Yeah, there's no monopolist who can say which products you're allowed or not allowed to sell. Right? Any entrepreneur can sell whatever he wants to consenting adults. It's just that most likely the customers would demand certain transparency standards to exist. And if not, if you're fine with taking a pill where you have no idea what's inside, sure. But I would say that most people want to know what's actually in the pills.
Huh? Okay. So what's happening here? I create a product, and if I put some stuff in it that is probably going to have adverse events in 20 years down the line, then the question is, do I tell them that I'm putting it in? And if I don't, let's go with that. Then at least the government should somehow make sure that what they say it's in it, that's in it. Like, or who should make sure?
Again, I think the customers do that, right? Like if you offer and advertise me that, hey, I'm gonna sell you a box full of gold, and then I buy it, I'm thinking that what you advertise is actually the product, but I open the box and it turns it's full of shit instead of gold, right? Then you've defrauded me. You've stolen my money, right? Because we had a contract saying that I give you money in exchange for a box of gold
What if it's
with
like
certain
trace amount
characteristics.
of shit?
Well, I mean, again, if you do give me a certain if we contracted for a certain quantity of stuff and you give me different stuff or less quantity of the original thing that I wanted, then you're simply violating the contract, right? So I can get my lawyers to take you to court under a breach of contract. So here again, the person who has been violated has right to seek retribution and justice.
You talk a lot about violation here. I've heard Brian Johnson at one point talk about how he defines these microaggressions. So if I offer you a chocolate, that's a microaggression from me towards you because the chocolate is not good for your health. In that sense, isn't that also violence?
Well, I guess here again the differentiation is consent, right? If you give me something and I take it, then there doesn't really seem to be violence there because there was consent, right? Now the question is it informed consent? But that's a really difficult question because then you could argue that like every bakery is aggression because they're selling you carbs and sugar which aren't good for you. And so I'm
Maybe
not
the
sure if
government should come and save us from the bakeries.
well, no, the government put grain as the number one base food source, right? So they started this whole mess ultimately. Like people have the right to harm themselves ultimately, right? Because it's not your body. If you can stop someone else from harming himself, then you claim ownership over his body. right? So that's simply not yours to do. Now you might proselytize and suggest people to, hey, how about you do stuff that doesn't hurt you? And if your arguments are compelling, then most likely a vast majority of people will follow you, because most people don't want to hurt themselves willingly, right? It's just an issue that we're not so quite sure about what exactly we should be putting into our body. I think this is one of the funny things that I like about your podcast. All of these people hyper conscious about extending their health span. It's still huge disagreements in what to eat. Should you be vegan? Should you be carnivore? Should you do supplements? Should you not? We simply don't know, right? So to have the hubris to say that, no, this is the one exclusive correct way to do it, and as soon as you deviate from this diet, it is an aggression because it shortens your lifespan. I would say we just don't know at this point. And even if we would
Well, I
know
mean,
for
the
certain,
sugar only diet is quite compelling, you have to admit. You only eat
um,
honey and
well,
sugar and maple syrup and some fruits.
well, maybe, but
No
like, I
better
mean,
diet
people
than
say
that.
honey is great. Like some honey might be good for you, right? Because there are lots of minerals and whatnot in it. I haven't seen conclusive evidence to really convince me of one diet being exclusively the most optimal. I'm not sure how we would even make such claims in the first place. So what I'm getting at is we need experimentation, right? And if we have some way that a government says you cannot experiment anymore, handing people chocolates is aggression and must be punished, that doesn't seem correct to me.
Okay. And what about this informed adults here who are not informed consenting adults, like children?
Yeah, so there are humans who've not yet created their full capacity to make contracts, and specifically children, mentally disabled people, someone who does need kind of the guardian hand of someone else. It's a difficult area of life to deal with, obviously. And I would say again, property rights get us close to a solution here, and specifically that the parents have right over their children, right? If in the sense of if parents don't want certain things to be done to their kids, then that goes a long way. And ultimately, still, kids do have rights right away, right? And harming them, initiating aggression is not the right thing to do. So even if parents do harm their children, that is something that must not be done, and where the parents would have to be brought to justice. Again, like we need to have an actionable, quantifiable, like directly observable metric of aggression. And then that's where things get difficult, right? It's easy to say with rape or with like physical breaking of the body, etc., like, punching someone in the face. It does get a lot more subtle when we talk about nutrition. But yeah, ultimately, someone has to bear the responsibility of raising a child. The parents are usually the best ones to take on this responsibility, and then they can contractually delegate this responsibility to others. Right? You can put up your kids for abortion and basically contract away your right over the children to someone else who then has the responsibility to raise them.
What's your view on child labor?
Great, as long as it's consensual, right? I think children have the capacity to be extremely useful. They have small hands, they can clean in tight corners, which is very useful. Um, Plus, they work is an essential part of raising, of growing up. If being productive is a useful thing, and a like encouraging thing, it's fun to help others ultimately. So giving kids the opportunity to grow up via work and labor is a good thing, right? So even in these extreme cases, right, where the first child protection laws came up in the Industrial Revolution, because work was fucking hard back then, right? You were in the coal mines, you were like shoveling coals into the steam engine, etc. Those were hard. This was hard work, right? But the alternative was worse. Quite often, like if you couldn't get work, then you just starve. So doing hard work and surviving is better than not doing any work and starving because you don't have capital to feed yourself. So thankfully, a lot of this hard labor has been automized thanks to more capital and more machines. And so we don't need to, dig holes out of the ground as kids. But there's other useful tasks that kids absolutely can do without having long-term sustained harm. Bringing out the newspapers, washing dishes, whatever. There's a lot of good tasks that can and should be done. And so when kids get that responsibility early, I think that helps them to grow up. right? So teach your kids how to code, make them productive right away.
So don't we have an internal inconsistency here? Like we just talked about consent able adults, right? Like people whose mental capacity is already good enough to be able to make contracts. But we said that children are not such things. So don't we have a problem there?
Well, there, for one, you stop being a child when you do have the capacity to make contracts for yourself. That's, I think, how Rothbard kind of defined on when do kids grow up, when they want to walk away from the house, right? When they no longer want to be under the care of the parents ultimately. So this is one good metric of when do we start to treat children as adults, when they make their own choices ultimately. And still, like there is a difference between even kids when they do the chores, there is a difference of like consent is already somewhat implied here. I like children can consent as well. It might be a bit difficult to get them to agree with you, but their children, even though they are not yet grown-ups, can make their own decisions and do consent on, for example, getting work done. And of course, here's a little bit of, how do you say, discipline, right? Kids might not want to fold their laundry or, clean up the table. Um, but I guess a good parent to some extent disciplines the kids in the sense of practically showing them that doing the work is not a bad thing, that it helps others, and that is a good worth striving for, right? Like kids are idiots sometimes, or do things that they shouldn't be doing, and so some form of discipline is necessary that might go against their direct wishes, right? If you're kind of the helicopter mom that does whatever the kids want them to do, then the kids turn out to be weirdos in the long run.
Let's see if I can bring this closer to the topic of health and longevity here. How about drugs? When can children consent to drugs? Let's start with something heavy like crack cocaine. When can people start to consent to taking crack cocaine?
Yeah, that is a really interesting phenomenon, right? And I guess it comes when you grow up, right? Where exactly that line is difficult to show, right? I mean, putting it arbitrarily at 18 or something is not really a useful or good solution. And so again, Rothbard would say as soon as they start walking out of the house. With hard drugs like this, things become even more interesting because if you are heavily addicted, like physically addicted to a substance, does that still count as consent? Right? If your body kind of overrules your mind, it's a tough one, right? So are in a lot of like good way of thinking about this is to selling drugs is exploitative, right? You are exploiting the weakness of someone who is physically addicted to a substance. But similar arguments could be made for food, right? Humans are quite addicted to food. And apparently, there are a lot of long term downside consequences for eating the wrong food or in wrong quantities.
Okay, so drug dealers are, on the one hand, exploitatives, but on the other hand, also heroes. I'm not sure. You're probably familiar with Walter's book, Defending the Undefendable. And, this is such an undefendable case that the government is the main aggressor. And if someone breaks the laws of government, the main aggressor, that makes them the heroes because they are standing up against the main aggressor. And you could be a villain and a hero at the same time because, on the other hand, you're doing exploitative things, but also you are standing up for the big bully. Look, I really wanted to title this episode In Defense of Hookers and Coke, but I don't think we talked too much about these things, and probably the entire thing is already so big that that will not be the title. But let's talk a bit about that. Okay, so I said it a couple of times in the show, but I actually heard from you something like, I'm not your father, do hookers and coke. Okay, where does this philosophy come from?
Yeah, so it basically comes from a long time from the advent of natural law, right? Observable, objective criteria of which things to do and which not to do. And I think the TLDR of this tradition is to just not steal. Right? That is the main rule that humans ought to follow. This is a basic but quite defensible analysis of different actions, right? And if we apply this rule consistently, including to hookers and coke, then we see that prostitution is something that does not involve theft. Right? We have a woman who wants to earn money and she owns her body and is in control of it, and has the ability to offer sexual services. And on the other hand, we have a man who has money, is willing to give it up in exchange for some care and attention, so to say. So yeah, uh, these are two consulting adults doing their business together, ultimately. And as with any voluntary trade, we have a win-win situation. The prostitute has more money, right? So she can feed her kids and whatnot. And the other guy had a good time and now has focus on and energy for other things. So ultimately, it doesn't really create destruction in the direct analysis, right? Both people have the thing that they wanted more than the thing that they gave up. Now, of course, the question is under which circumstances did the woman give up her body? If the situation would have been different, would she have done something else? Right? Let's say if she would have had more money already, and if she was rich, would she have done this nevertheless? And so I guess here, if we all would be richer, then most likely things like taking drugs, selling drugs, or acquiring and providing the service of prostitution would probably decrease. But well, that is the scenario that currently not everyone is rich, right? And most likely that will continue to be the case for a long time. And so prostitution and the drug trade is a service that that can be provided in order to get out of a lack of capital. Right? There's probably been numerous girls who've made their way in life and started to build savings because of their selling of sexual services, and then they can move on to other things, right? So it might just be a bootstrapping mechanism, so to say. But yeah, ultimately, consenting adults, and so that at the very first analysis makes it quite trivial of, hey, there is no theft involved, so there's nothing inherently bad with this.
Max, let me ask you the last question that I always ask from people who are on the show. Are you familiar with the contrarian question of Peter Thiel?
Yeah. What's one thing that you believe that most others think is wrong, right?
That's perfect. I think the first person who was able to say it back. Nice. Oh no, there was someone else, but they heard from me, so that doesn't count. All right. So, what's one thing that you strongly believe to be the case, but very few people agree with you on?
Well, one of the things that might not perfectly fit this description, but not mainly because people are ignorant about the fact rather than strongly disagreeing with it, is that receiving fiat money is stealing from a lot of people. And so whenever you get paid in fiat, you steal from millions and billions of people who receive this newly created fiat after you. So fiat money is a currency, a money that is being inflated, right? Where someone else has the power to create more units of that money, and he has the monopoly to create more units. So you cannot print the money, but he does. And this kicks off what's known as the Cantillon effect, right? So that whoever gets paid by this newly created money first benefits at the expense of those who receive this newly created money afterwards. And so who are the first people to receive this newly created money? Of course, the people with the money printer, so that's the central banks, and then those who are quite early in this chain of the dilution of this newly created money: governments, banks, large institutions, etc. Basically, anyone who has the power to create debt in today's fiat system. So they steal from anyone who comes further down the line of this money being distributed, including from you, right, who gets paid as a salary, once a month. This money that you're receiving was created by someone in the past, and he's actively taking capital out of your hands just by the fact that you're getting paid in this currency. And that's of course an egregious thing. And that means that fiat money leads a lot of people to get stolen from, including you. Not good. But the real scary realization is that the puck doesn't stop with you. There's a long chain of people who do receive this newly created money after you have received it, and meaning that you actively do steal from those people that come after you. Not just people who are alive today, but their children and children's children in other countries or other continents who do receive this newly created money after you. So increasing the money supply is a perverse incentive and misallocation of capital. And the real devilish part of this trick is that it not just turns us all into victims, but simultaneously it turns us all into perpetrators. And that is just a really, really bad thing. So I think it's an economic, a strategic, especially a moral imperative to not get paid in a money that can be printed by someone else. So I encourage all of the listeners to consider the ethics of using fiat money, right? And instead use a sound money like gold and especially Bitcoin.